Not supposed to be here. When my mother was pregnant, she got told that she had to be prepared to lose the child. And still I was born. And I was told this story my entire childhood, and I'm sure it played a very big role in me taking whatever you think is granted, every ordinary behavior you have on a daily basis. What is ordinary for you is extraordinary for me. And it played a very big role in me becoming a behavioral and brain scientist, trying to understand what makes us what we are, why we make those decisions, how we interact with each other, and especially, how come in spite of all the knowledge we have as intelligent human beings, we keep on doing stupid things, things that can harm ourselves, and even harm the entire planet and society sometimes. So I decided to study the brain. I went into a lab. I became what people consider the perfect lab rat, working for more than a decade in my experiments, in my lab. But at some point, I started to wonder, wow, you're doing these things, you're reading these things, can you help people? Can you put this knowledge to good use? Is it possible to improve people's life, people's health, well-being, thanks to what we know on brain and behavior? But there was a twist. A brain on its own, it's totally useless. And the knowledge on the brain on its own, it's totally useless. For the brain to become something useful, you need the brain to exchange information. Information between different parts of a brain. Between the brain and the body. Between the brain, the body, and the environments. Social, physical. Add on top of this, our history as human beings, as individuals and society. And our future, which temporarily is materialized in our intentions. And here we are, we have to deal with the most complex system ever. And do you know how most people deal with this complex system? With one tool that we really fancy, whether we are politicians, whether we are scientists, or in business. This tool is a survey. Asking people what they think, what they do, what they like, and trusting in this information. No later than yesterday, as I was heading to work, someone stopped me and said, hey, would you like to answer a couple of questions? We are interested in your eating habits and physical activity habits. I said, yes, of course. And I was asked about eating in between meals, which is not very recommended. And I said, well, yes, I do it often, and I take an apple or a banana. And they asked me whether I was exercising, and I know, yeah, I want to stay fit, so it's important to exercise. So whenever I have time, I try to exercise as much as I can. And also, I walk to school as much as I can. But sometimes it rains, so I take my car. But I'm aware that it's very bad to multitask behind the wheel. You see where I'm heading here? Is that basically we're using this verbal knowledge that we ask people in order to design policy, in order to decide how we're going to help people. And the problem might be that some people lie, but most of the people answer in good faith, but have no real clue on what are the major drives of the behavior. Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And then people in charge have big surprises. They start polls, surveys, and realize that 90% of us are very concerned about protecting the environment. And in spite of that, only 20% of us are taking good actions to do it, doing something. How come there is such a gap between good intentions and action? Well, maybe it is because before you ask the person down the street, the person has not been thinking about the environment over the past 2 weeks because there is something else more important on the mind, such as paying the bills, being able to eat at the end of the month. But by asking the person, of course, the person feels concerned. Recently, I coordinated a report for the French government in which we report some brain experiment that is very interesting. So take smokers, for example, and you show smokers, heavy smokers, the kind of messages, warning messages, and you ask them to rate them. And guess what? Most of the people said, oh yes, I'm really impacted by these messages. They really shame me. Oh, they will trigger some change in my behavior. I want to stop smoking. But the same people, the very same people, if you put them in a brain scan, you see that when they read these messages, those areas participating to craving cigarettes have a significant increase in their activity. Hence, what they are saying with their mouths and what the brain is saying is totally opposite. And if you base your policy strategy just on what people are saying, you might be going totally the wrong way. Another experiment we mentioned is about the way you present food. So people are in a brain scan, and they're eating soup, exactly the same kind of soup. And guess what? If you say this is just soup, there is this level of activity in those areas of the brain that are doing us some good. And if you say it's a soup cooked by a French chef, fancy soup, there is a significant increase in activity in their brains. Wow. But do we really need brain sciences to find this out? Well, brain sciences allow to somewhat have a metric of it. But when I talk to people in charge, they say, oh, we know that. Oh, yes, we know. It's obvious. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my world. I'm dealing with the obvious. What most of the people consider the obvious. I'm not dealing with extraordinary things. I'm dealing with our habits, what we are. But the problem is what means obvious for people in charge. Well, it has a different meaning for me. Why? Because we might be very rational as human beings, and being informed might be sufficient, but who else but us humans have been able to create a technique that can extinguish our own species? No stupid rabbit has done that. No, we did. We're intelligent. Because the governments, they think that if we inform people, people are going to make the right choices because they think of us as rational. And guess what? Yes, information is necessary, but not sufficient. If it were sufficient, we wouldn't have any physicians smoking. But when you look at the stats, there are the same amount of physicians smoking amongst physicians than amongst non-physicians. Information cannot be sufficient. Information, or too much information, can be a problem sometimes. Have you ever driven along these long roads, straight roads, where you either fall asleep or people race? So the governments, they want you to slow down and pay attention. And guess what? The one way for people to slow down is not to put signs, it's to remove any mark along the road, on the road and next to the road. If you remove a marking on the road, people will feel less safe, and they will pay more attention. So less information can be very useful. But again, lots of people I deal with on a daily basis in institutions, they say, oh, it's obvious, we know that. Yes, but for me, obvious has a different meaning. Obvious means ordinary behavioral variability of individuals that are overconfident and who underestimate social influence. Because we influence ourselves a lot. Take, for example, what happened in England. They tried to fight binge drinking, and their strategy was to say, most of the kids are drinking a lot. Well, wrong idea, because if you say most of the kids are doing so, you establish binge drinking as the social norm. Hence, we have a tendency as human beings to mirror the behavior of others. And by establishing such norms, you're enticing people into drinking. Same thing if you want to fight littering in your city. Don't show posters with trash everywhere. Show clean streets, because people will mimic the right behavior, or the behavior they think the majority adopts. But you can put this to good use. For instance, there is no need to tell people, well, if you don't use too much energy, you're going to save money, or you're going to protect the environment. This works, but to some extent, you know what works better? Tell them that their neighbors are doing so. It works for you, for me, and even for farmers in China. telling the farmers in China what the right way of farming is in terms of protecting the environment doesn't work as much as telling them that the neighbor is doing so. Isn't that great? We're influenced by others. Recently, we ran experiments using a device that allows to put some parts of a brain to rest. Because there is this dichotomy, you know? We always think about our behaviors in terms of emotions and rationality. And when you open a neuroscience textbook, you can read most of the time that there is a part of the brain around here that is in charge of controlling our behavior, cognition, rationality, and deeper parts of the brain in charge of emotions. So we put this rational part of the brain to rest for a little while. And guess what? People behave even more rationally. How incredible is that? Well, it's not really incredible. We might have been totally mistaken about the way the brain is working and or the definition of rationality itself. Actually, when you look inside the brain, those supposedly rational and emotional parts of the brain, they exchange information all the time. You cannot have emotion without rationality. You cannot have rationality without emotion. We function along something we coined emorationality. And actually, when you think of your behavior in terms of, am I being rational? Is this person being rational? Our definition of rationality comes from where? From economics. Economics, you know what, is considering us, humans, and our behavior. Me being influenced by you, me being in love with Audrey, me loving Sarah, Chloe, me being influenced by people and being lazy as an anomaly. Can we rely on a theory that is considering our daily behavior an anomaly in order to design our public policy? No, we can't. We have to embrace emorationality. We have to consider that it's not, the biggest issue is not to know whether we're emotional or rational. It's to know what good we can do. And thanks to behavioral and brain sciences, together, we can learn more about what drives our behavior. So the next time you make a decision, start thinking whether people are going to like it, whether you're being rational, logical, etc. Just think about something. Think about what is influencing you. Think about what your goal is. Because ultimately, it's all about emorationality. I am emorational. You are emorational. We are all emorational. Thank you.